Jack Thompson will never forget the moment everything changed. My son-in-law, Mike, grabbed my daughter Emily's wrist so hard that her knuckles turned white. Then he leaned closer and said through clenched teeth, "Say one more word, and you'll regret it." The room went silent. It happened right at my dinner table in Ohio. I didn't shout. I didn't jump to my feet. I simply watched. But inside, something changed. That single moment told me everything I needed to know. Mike released her wrist and stormed out of the house. Emily immediately tried to act like nothing had happened. She rubbed her wrist and forced a small smile. "I'm fine, Dad," she said, but I could see the fear in her eyes. A fear no parent ever wants to see. My wife, Sarah, was still cleaning up in the kitchen when I quietly walked into the garage. I stood there alone for several minutes, thinking. For months I had ignored the warning signs, the excuses, the strange behavior, the sadness Emily tried so hard to hide. Not anymore. That night I made a decision. I was going to protect my daughter, no matter how difficult it became. The next morning Mike showed up acting completely normal. He carried coffee in one hand and wore a confident smile. He kissed Emily on the cheek and joked around like nothing had happened. But I noticed something different. He seemed nervous. His eyes moved around the room constantly. He checked his phone every few minutes. Emily noticed it too. For the first time in months, she seemed slightly less afraid. It was a small change, but it mattered. Later that afternoon, Sarah pulled me aside. "Jack," she whispered, "something feels wrong. What's going on?" I looked at her carefully. "I'm trying to help Emily," I said quietly. Sarah studied my face. "Is she safe?" "I'm making sure she will be." That answer didn't fully satisfy her, but she nodded. That evening, Emily found me sitting alone on the back porch. Without saying a word, she rolled up her sleeve. A dark bruise covered part of her arm. My stomach dropped. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. Tears filled her eyes. "A while." The words hit me harder than I expected. She finally told me everything. Mike had been struggling with gambling. The losses were getting worse. The stress was making him angry. And Emily had become the person he blamed. I listened quietly. Every detail hurt. Every word made me more determined. "Emily," I said, "you don't have to live like this." She looked away. "I don't know how to leave." That was when I knew she needed more than advice. She needed support. Real support. The next several days were difficult. Very difficult. Sarah and I helped Emily gather important documents. We encouraged her to speak with professionals. We connected her with people who could help. Step by step, she started taking control of her life again. Meanwhile, Mike seemed to realize things were changing. He became restless, unpredictable, sometimes angry, sometimes unusually quiet. One afternoon he called me. "Did Emily talk to you?" he asked. I paused. "She's my daughter," I replied. "That's not what I asked." His voice sounded different, less confident, more desperate. I ended the conversation. The tension continued building. Every day felt like we were waiting for something. Every phone call made our hearts race. Every knock at the door felt important. Then one night everything exploded. Mike arrived unexpectedly. He pulled into the driveway fast. The headlights lit up the entire front yard. Emily froze. Sarah grabbed her hand. Mike marched toward the front door. For several seconds nobody moved. Then he started pounding. "Emily." The sound echoed through the house. Again, and again, and again. My heart raced. But this time things were different. Emily wasn't alone anymore. She had support. She had people standing beside her. And she had finally found the courage to make a choice. Instead of opening the door, she picked up her phone. She made a call. A call she had been afraid to make for months. When she finished speaking, she looked at me. Her hands were shaking, but there was determination in her eyes. Outside, Mike continued yelling. Then suddenly he stopped. A long silence followed. We watched from the window. He stood there for several moments. Then he turned around, slowly, quietly, and walked back to his truck. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. We simply watched him leave. The taillights disappeared into the darkness. And for the first time in a long time, Emily could breathe. The following days brought major changes. Mike finally admitted he needed help. The gambling problem had consumed his life. His debts were growing. His relationships were falling apart. Everything was collapsing around him. Eventually, he agreed to enter a rehabilitation program in another state. Not because someone forced him, because he had reached a point where he could no longer deny reality. Before leaving, he sent Emily a letter. The envelope arrived on a rainy afternoon. Emily opened it with trembling hands. Sarah and I sat beside her. The letter contained an apology. Not a perfect apology. Not a magical fix, but a real one. For the first time, Mike admitted the damage he had caused. For the first time, he accepted responsibility. Emily cried as she finished reading. Sarah wrapped her arms around her. Nobody spoke for several minutes. There was nothing to say. Healing had finally begun. The divorce paperwork was completed shortly afterward. It wasn't easy. It wasn't painless. But it was necessary. Life slowly started moving forward. Weeks turned into months. The fear that once lived inside our home gradually disappeared. The tension faded. The silence faded. The uncertainty faded. 6 months later, we gathered around the same dinner table where everything had started. But this time the atmosphere felt completely different. People were laughing, talking, smiling. Emily looked happier than she had in years. She had started planning a new future, a future built on freedom rather than fear. At one point, Sarah squeezed my hand under the table. She smiled softly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For refusing to ignore what was right in front of us." I looked around the room, at my wife, at my daughter, at the peace we had fought so hard to regain. And I realized something important. Being a father isn't about fixing everything. It isn't about having all the answers. Sometimes it simply means standing beside the people you love when they need you most. Sometimes it means helping them find the courage they can't find alone. And sometimes it means refusing to look away when something is wrong. That night, as the laughter continued around the table, I felt grateful. Grateful that Emily was safe. Grateful that she had a second chance. Grateful that our family had survived one of the hardest chapters of our lives. The road ahead would still have challenges, but for the first time in a very long time, we were facing them together. And together was exactly where we belonged.